Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. I was 34 years old when I first heard a word that would change my life. It was at a celebration of life ceremony we had for my father. After the service, a man came up to me. He said he didn't know my father well, but that he knew of him. He said, "From what I could tell, your dad was a good man and a really good entrepreneur." Now, in my 34 years, here's what I had come to know about the man who raised me. I knew he was a dark-skinned black man who grew up in rural North Carolina during Jim Crow. I knew he could have played baseball in the Negro Leagues, but he got hurt. I knew he moved to Los Angeles because it was seen as a new frontier for black men. I knew he spent years working maintenance at offices and stores. And I knew that in his late 40s, he opened one convenience store and then another. But I had never known my dad was an entrepreneur. I didn't even know what the word meant. Now, how can that be, right? How can a man grow up in America, go to college, and never hear the word entrepreneur until he's 34 years old? And how can that same man go on to become the vice president of entrepreneurship at a foundation named of one of the great entrepreneurs in history? Well, the answer to that question is what I am here to talk about today. Understanding why I didn't know the word entrepreneur may be the key to unlocking billions, even trillions of dollars in investor returns, while creating opportunity for millions who don't have it now. The truth is that the last great untapped asset class in America is hiding in plain sight. This is where the story comes back to my father. We live near a long street in Los Angeles that crossed many kinds of neighborhoods. For us, it was more than a boulevard. It was really more of a Berlin Wall, because the life experiences were vastly different depending on which side you came from. If you lived on the north side of the street, you were in a zip code that had a very good reputation. This is where children of famous parents lived. They all knew what entrepreneurs were. But I grew up on the south side, just one block away from the boulevard in a different zip code. And that wasn't all that was different. It was the edge of where those other people lived, where the grass wasn't as green, the houses weren't as big, the ambulances didn't get there as fast, but the police sure did. Just one block away. My dad and I had a ritual in the 5th grade. He'd pick me up after school, and 3 or 4 times a month, we'd go to a bank. Sometimes it was the same bank. And one day I asked, "Why do we go to so many banks?" And he said, "I'll tell you when you get older." Turns out he was trying to get that first loan to open a chain of convenience stores. At every IPO, investors ask, what are the barriers to entry? Well, at these banks, my dad's barrier to entry was pretty simple. He lived one zip code away from what they considered worthy. Just one block away. He didn't know about redlining. He didn't know that banks literally drew lines on a map between those they'd lend to and those they wouldn't. He was always just a little too dark or a little too old. He had good credit, but he didn't have credit experience. So, "I'm sorry, sir, your score is just 7 points too low," is something he heard often. He was always the other. And this went on for 4 years. Finally, after hearing no dozens of times, he finally heard yes. A black-owned bank saw him as worthy and gave him a loan. I remember how elated he was. He said, "Someone finally trusted me." He opened up a convenience store in South Central Los Angeles, and it did well. He went back to the bank and got another loan and opened a second store just south of the Los Angeles Coliseum. Those investments paid off. My dad wasn't just a good entrepreneur, he was a good asset for the community. For 20 years, he created jobs while giving back to the neighborhood. But he never went beyond those 2 stores. He always said, I don't want to be told that I'm not worthy ever again. He just stopped, and it killed him a little bit every day because he lived one block away. It's hard to overstate what it does to a person day after day, week after week, to be seen as the other, of being told again and again that you're not enough. It's hard to describe the anger, the frustration, and the urge to act out in a society that condemns you if you do. So why do I tell you this? It turns out I learned the definition of entrepreneur in time to realize that there are millions of untapped assets in communities across America today who have the same genius and potential as my dad. But too many of them live that one block away or that one rural county away. Too many are seen as the other. Too many face the same barriers my dad faced in 1972. Honestly, how can it be that Black-owned businesses are still twice as likely to be rejected for a loan? How can it be that women are 60% less likely to secure funding than men when pitching the same business? And how can it be that of the $69.1 trillion in global assets under the four major asset classes, including mutual funds, hedge funds, real estate, and private equity, less than 1.3% is invested in firms owned by women, Black Americans, and other people of color? So let me bring that life to you. Imagine 100 boxes. 99 boxes are white, one is Black. Imagine an airplane with 100 seats, 99 men and one woman. Imagine an awards show that hands out 100 statues, 99 to men and one to a Black woman. That's the state of asset financing today. Now ask yourself this, in a competitive global economy, do we really believe that America can afford to waste the energy and ideas of one entrepreneur, let alone half its population? And if you're an investor who is doing well today, ask yourself this: who is going to buy your products in 15 or 20 years when less than half of America is white? Who is going to buy your products when your children take over? So, how do we remove the friction, as money managers say, to change outcomes and change lives? Our passion at the Kauffman Foundation is to change conditions for entrepreneurs by changing the systems in which they operate. We do so by identifying the barriers that entrepreneurs from marginalized backgrounds face and then tackling root causes rather than just treating symptoms. Amelia Earhart talked about the 4 phases of flight. There's wait, lift, thrust, and drag. Her favorite part was the moment of lift, when the forces pushing the plane up were greater than the ones holding it down. How do we get past the systemic forces holding women, Black Americans, and other people of color down to create that moment of lift for entrepreneurs? What are the 4 phases of their flight? Well, the first is access to opportunity. Entrepreneurship can be an engine for sustainable growth and prosperity, but not if it remains so hard for so many people to access. Too many entrepreneurs face a confusing gauntlet of outdated regulations and permits. And unlike big established corporations, entrepreneurs lack the means to hire teams of consultants and attorneys and lobbyists to shape and navigate those complicated systems. We cannot make this opportunity available to all until we address the underlying structural and systemic issues that make it so. It just shouldn't be so darn hard to start a business. So the second is funding. We need to close the wealth gap for those who have the talent to become assets for their community if they can get the assets they need to start a business. We need to close the credit gap for entrepreneurs like my father who are still weighted down by invisible walls they cannot see or touch, but they feel the effects of every day. And as much as we celebrate the individual initiative, we need to recognize that there is not and has never been an I in entrepreneur. It's a team sport. The third is access to knowledge. So far too many courageous entrepreneurs take the risk of starting a business without knowing where to begin. We need to provide access to networks, mentors, and support organizations who have the know-how to turn those ideas into a reality. And we need to nurture a more diverse pool of talent by giving students and teachers, K through 12, the real life learning opportunities and experiences they need to succeed. And the fourth is access to support. So maybe you have a really great idea for a business and there's an entrepreneur support class across town, but you're a single mom and you can't go because the cost of childcare is too high. Or the number 5 bus you used to take isn't running anymore. Finance, credit, infrastructure, healthcare, childcare, these are all the barriers to entry that are desperate for transformational change. And we must work with policymakers to ensure that risk takers are not locked out of opportunities that can lift their families and communities up. At the Kauffman Foundation, we refer to this as America's New Business Plan, our bipartisan plan that is focused on creating new jobs and rebuilding an economy that works for everyone. And this is not about taking more from one place and putting it into another place. In a way, it's about a different kind of IPO. It's about understanding that America will be stronger if we focus not just on initial public offerings, but on initial people offerings. It's about seeing that America will be more innovative if people like my dad have the same opportunity to succeed as everyone else. It's about realizing that in cities and towns across America, the last great untapped asset class is living one block or one county away from the places we've always looked. It's time for all of us to look one block over, to see the genius that is waiting to be ignited, and the millions of entrepreneurs who just need a chance to show what they can do. They are not the other. They are us. They are all of us. They are the future of this country. And it's long past time that we recognize, like it or not, that we are all in this together. And that's exactly how it should be.